Welcome to the Mount in Lenox, Massachusetts, the Gilded Age dream home designed by Edith Wharton, the first woman to win the Pulitzer Prize and the woman who literally wrote the book on interior design, helping to reshape American taste at the turn of the 20th century. This 1902 time capsule became Edith Wharton's most personal expression of the design principles she deeply believed in. Symmetry, natural light, classical proportion, and a deep connection to the landscape, ideas that would help shape the next era of American interiors. Her eye for style, architecture, and the quiet power of simplicity helped lead a shift away from heavy, overly decorated Victorian interiors towards a more timeless idea of home, inspired by French and Italian design. Today, we're stepping inside the Mount to explore the interiors, architecture, and gardens where that vision came to life, and see how Wharton's design principles still feel remarkably modern more than a century later. Hi, I'm Allie, and welcome back to Fab Little Dish, where we celebrate vintage interiors, historic preservation, and the stories that keep these places alive. If you love historic house tours, hit that thumbs up. It really helps support the channel. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the incredible homes that I've been traveling all over and working so hard to bring you. Now let's head to the Berkshires, step inside Edith Wharton's world, and discover more about the woman whose ideas helped transform the world of interior design. Edith Wharton was a force in the early 20th century, a novelist, designer, traveler, tastemaker, humanitarian, and one of the sharpest observers of American society of her time. Edith Wharton was born Edith Newbold Jones in New York City in 1862 into the kind of old New York world she would later write about and become famous for. Her parents, George Frederick Jones and Lucretia Stevens Rhinelander, came from established New York families connected to banking, real estate, shipbuilding, and old colonial society. Her great-grandfather, Ebenezer Stevens, served as an artillery officer during the Revolutionary War and was also connected to the Boston Tea Party, so Edith came from a family with deep roots in American history. But some of her greatest influences came from far beyond America. As a child, Edith spent years traveling through Europe with her family, especially through France, Germany, and Italy. Those early experiences left a profound impression on her, helping to shape her eye for style and design that she would carry throughout her lifetime. She became fluent in multiple languages and developed a remarkable memory for rooms, houses, gardens, architecture, and the atmosphere of Europe itself. She would cross the Atlantic dozens of times throughout her life, returning again and again to Europe as travel became one of her greatest teachers. Edith Wharton didn't have formal training as an architect or interior designer, but she had studied beauty her entire life, mainly through travel, and she observed closely the way people lived inside rooms. Long before she became one of America's most celebrated novelists, Wharton was already obsessed with the idea of home and its decoration. In 1897, she partnered with architect and designer Ogden Codman Jr. to write The Decoration of Houses, one of the most influential interior design books of its time. Wharton pushed back against the heavy, crowded, overly decorated Victorian interiors that were fashionable in the mid to late 19th century. To her, beauty was not about filling a room with as much as possible. It was about harmony, restraint, comfort, proportion, all designed through intention. She believed a beautiful room should begin with architecture, with the walls, windows, doors, fireplaces, furniture, light, and views all working together. When Edith Wharton built this house in 1902, she was creating a living example of everything she believed a home should be. She was about 40 years old when she moved in, and the Mount became her dream home, a private retreat where she could bring her favorite French and Italian design influences to life. But Edith's life was not as calm or perfectly arranged as the rooms that she designed. She married Edward Teddy Wharton when she was 23 years old, which was considered a little late for a woman of her social standing at the time. They came from similar social backgrounds, but the marriage became increasingly unhappy. They never had children, and over time, Edith built a life that was centered more and more around her writing, traveling, designing, friendships, independence, and her own creative expressionism. Henry James became one of the great literary friendships in her life, a trusted mentor and friend who took her work seriously, encouraged her writing, and helped give her confidence as she emerged as a major American novelist. Later, in her 40s, she had a passionate and painful affair with journalist Morton Fullerton And throughout her life, Walter Berry remained one of her deepest emotional attachments. So even though Edith built a life of elegance, discipline, travel, and achievement, there was also longing there. A longing for freedom, intimacy, and a love that she sought out her entire life. And during her years here, her literary career began to fully take off. Here at the Mount, Edith Wharton wrote some of her most important works, including The House of Mirth, the novel that made her famous. Published in 1905, The House of Mirth tells a story of Lily Bart, a beautiful woman trapped inside the rules, expectations, money, gossip, and cruelty of old New York society. This was a world Edith knew too well, and the loneliness that was associated with it. Later, the Age of Innocence would return to that old New York world again, looking back at the society of the 1870s, the world Edith had entered as a young girl when she was introduced into society earlier than expected. Her mother was worried about how much she wrote and how much she read, so she actually pushed her debut into society at age 15 rather than 16. That novel won the Pulitzer Prize, making Edith Wharton the first woman to receive the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. She also wrote Ethan Frome. She had numerous different writings on travel, ghost stories, and she had other writings that focused on design elements, gardening, and she created more than 40 books over the course of her life. And her impact didn't stop there. When World War I broke out, she was living in France, and instead of returning safely to America, she stayed. She created work programs for unemployed women, helped Belgian and French refugees, supported children that were fleeing the war, opened schools and hostels, supported hospitals and convalescent homes, and used her influence to raise money and bring attention to what was happening overseas. She was also one of the few writers allowed near the front lines, and she wrote about what she saw. In 1916, she edited The Book of Homeless, a major fundraising anthology that brought together work from important writers, artists, and composers to support war refugees. For her humanitarian work, the French government awarded her with the Legion of Honor. She spent the last decades of her life in France, and when she died in 1937, she was buried in Versailles. So the Mount represents a powerful woman, the home of someone who chose creativity over convention, turned her eye for beauty into a philosophy, and transformed the world she knew into some of the most powerful writing of the early 20th century. Set in the heart of the Berkshires, surrounded by trees, gardens, terraces, and rolling landscape, the house was created as a place of privacy, beauty, and retreat, away from the social pressure of New York and Newport society. Edith and Teddy Wharton built the Mount in 1902 on more than 100 acres here in Lenox, Massachusetts, and at just under 17,000 square feet, it was still a grand Gilded Age country house, but the feeling is much more restrained, thoughtful, and personal than some of the more theatrical mansions of the period. The exterior was completed by architect Francis L.V. Hoppin, working from Edith Wharton's vision, and the inspiration for the facade came from Belton House, a 17th century English country house in Lincolnshire. So architecturally, the Mount blends English country house inspiration with French and Italian classical design elements. Right away when you look at the house, you can see her love for symmetry. The facade feels calm, balanced, and beautifully composed. The windows, shutters, roofline, and central entrance all create this sense of order. And one of my favorite details is the use of illusion, which we will continue to see throughout the home. Some of the shutters here are perfectly lined up, even when there are no actual windows behind them. They were added to preserve the symmetry of the facade, because for Edith Wharton, the overall composition deeply mattered. As we step inside the Mount, the entrance immediately tells us something important about Edith Wharton's style. This isn't a grand, overwhelming entrance hall designed to announce wealth in the loudest possible way, like some other Gilded Age homes we've been looking at. It's actually much more understated, which feels very intentional. Edith Wharton was deeply protective of her privacy, and the Mount was created as a retreat from society, so even the act of entering the house feels controlled, quiet, and carefully managed. Guests would have arrived here and would have been welcomed by the butler before being brought upstairs to the main living spaces. So this entrance acted almost like a threshold, a transition from the outside world into Edith Wharton's private world. And even though the space feels modest compared to the other rooms we'll see later, it's still full of atmosphere. The barrel vaulted ceiling gives this room a beautiful sense of enclosure, and it even creates a slight echo, almost like you're stepping into a little chamber carved into the house. The terracotta tile floors add warmth, and the walls were designed to resemble stone, moss, and damp natural surfaces. Wharton wanted this entrance to feel almost like an Italian grotto. You can see that idea in the texture of the walls, the cooler cave-like feeling of the space, and the bronze figures. Wharton believed that a home should not just be decorated room by room, it needs to unfold like an experience. The entrance sets the mood, then guides you towards the rest of the house. From the entrance hall, we move to the main staircase. Edith Wharton did not believe that a home needed to overwhelm you immediately. She believed in proportion, restraint, function, and the experience of moving through a house with intention. This staircase was part of that experience as well. The railing here was made in Paris specifically for the mount, which gives the staircase another layer of European influence. These two large paintings along the staircase were original to the Whartons' time here, helping the space feel personal and connected to the world they created inside this home. At the top of the staircase, we arrive in the gallery, and this is where the mount really begins to start feeling bright, open, and beautifully composed. The natural light, pale walls, arched openings, marble floor, and the long row of windows all create a feeling that is elegant, open, and calm. The gallery worked almost like a reception area and as a passageway into the main living spaces of the house, a place where guests could arrive, pause, move towards the drawing room, dining room, library, or continue out towards the terrace and gardens. And that is very important to Edith Wharton's design philosophy. She believed rooms should not feel disconnected from one another. A house needed to unfold with intention, and each space should guide you naturally into the next. Here, the gallery does just that. It gives the main floor a sense of order and movement, while also connecting the indoors with the outdoors through light, windows, and all of the exterior views. Natural light was incredibly important to Edith Wharton. She was pushing away from the darker, heavy Victorian interiors of the late 19th century and toward rooms that felt clear, open, balanced, and more connected to the landscape around the home. So in this space, light becomes part of the actual design. The windows help shape the feeling of the room, brighten the passageway, and draw your eye outward towards the gardens and the surrounding mountains. This is the library. After the bright gallery, we step into a much warmer, richer space, surrounded by quarter sawn oak, built-in bookshelves, carved details, deep colors, and the kind of atmosphere meant for reading, conversation, and thought. The oak paneling was designed by Ogden Codman Jr., and it gives this room a beautiful warmth and structure to the space. It feels elegant but not overly decorated, and that fits perfectly with the design principles that Wharton and Codman laid out in the decoration of houses. They believed that a library should not be overwhelmed with decoration. The room should act as a setting for the books, and the books themselves should become part of the decoration. You can see that idea so clearly in here. The shelves are built into the walls, so the books feel like part of the architecture itself. Even the painting here was made to look like a tapestry, almost like it was part of the wall itself. Today, the books on these shelves are especially meaningful because they come from Edith Wharton's own personal library. Her collection contained around 2,700 volumes, and many of those books eventually returned right here to the Mount, bringing part of her personal world back into the house that she designed herself. Every book here helps tells us something about Edith, what she read, what inspired her, what she studied, and what she returned to, and how expansive her mind truly was. Her library included literature, poetry, history, philosophy, travel, architecture, gardens, and design, all in multiple languages too, the very subjects that shaped her work, her home, and her entire life. There's a publicity photo right here of Edith Wharton sitting at her desk in the library, looking very much like the proper author at work. But in reality, she preferred to write from bed. She knew how to perform the image that was expected of her. The disciplined writer at the desk surrounded by books, but her real creative process was much more private and personal. She knew how society and people wanted to see her, but she also was true to herself, and I just love that detail about her. The drawing room is the largest room inside the Mount, and this is where Edith Wharton's ideas of beauty and comfort really come together. This was one of the main rooms where Edith entertained her close friends and guests, but even though this was the largest room in the house, it still feels calm, balanced, and incredibly timeless. Edith didn't think that a room needed to be crowded or overwhelming to feel impressive. She believed beauty came from proportion, restraint, light, comfort, and the way a room actually functioned. And you can really see that in here. Instead of arranging the furniture in one stiff, formal setup, Edith preferred smaller groupings of chairs so guests could break off into more intimate conversations. This room also has the largest fireplace in the house, giving the space a strong focal point and a sense of rich coziness. And the ceiling is an elaborate multi-tiered plasterwork masterpiece. It's been nicknamed as God's own wedding cake because of its tiered, highly decorative moldings. Because this was the largest and most formal room in the house, the ceiling could carry more ornament without making the room feel cluttered. That is one of Wharton's design principles at work again. Design details should work with the function of the space and support the overall architecture rather than competing with it. And I love the little reminders of pups that we see throughout the home. Edith and Teddy Wharton loved their dogs, and they often had several little ones running around throughout the whole house. The drawing room also opens directly onto the terrace, just like the other principal rooms on this floor. Again, speaking to that connection to the outdoors that was essential to Edith Wharton. She wanted the house, terrace, gardens, and landscape to feel connected, almost as if the rooms continued on outside. This is one of my favorite spaces inside the Mount. The dining room gives us a clear visual into Edith Wharton's ideas of beauty, proportion, and restraint. It feels soft, open, and airy, which was very important to Wharton's style. The first thing I noticed in this room is the quality of light. At a time when so many late Victorian interiors were heavy, dark, and crowded, Edith wanted rooms that felt lighter, calmer, and more connected to the natural world. And you can really feel that in here. The pale walls, classical details, natural light, and views towards the terrace all make this room feel elegant without feeling overwhelming. Like the other principal rooms on this floor, the dining room opens right onto the terrace, which means the room was always connected to the gardens, the fresh air, and the wider landscape beyond the house. Wharton preferred smaller gatherings, and a round table here helped create that feeling. Instead of a long, formal table where conversation could feel distant and forced, a round table allowed guests to see each other, talk freely, and keep the conversation lively. The table helps us imagine Edith's inner circle gathered right here. One of the most important visitors that has a seat at the table is Henry James. Her husband, Edward Teddy Wharton, also has a seat here. We also see Mary Minnie Cadwallader Jones, Edith's sister-in-law, who Edith hired as her literary agent in the United States. There's also Beatrix Jones Farrand, Edith's niece, who helped with the design of the driveway here at the Mount, and later became one of the most successful professional female garden designers of her era. And this is where Edith liked to sit, so she could direct each course coming out from the butler's pantry, where dishes were plated and arranged after being brought up from the kitchen downstairs. The third floor held the bedrooms, making this level feel more private and personal than the main entertaining rooms below. And over to the left is Edith's suite of rooms, almost like a private apartment that she created for herself. This is Edith's sitting room and my favorite space in the house. This room was part of Edith's private suite. Edith's sitting room feels so personal, feminine, elegant, and deeply connected to her design philosophy. Instead of filling the room with too much furniture or clutter, the decoration is built into the architecture itself. The paneling, paintings, symmetry, fireplace, mirrors, windows, and soft colors all work together as one complete composition. One of the most special features in this room is the set of 8 surviving floral, still-life oil paintings that are built directly into the walls, which brings nature right into the room in such a refined and elegant way. The flower oil paintings almost act like windows into a softer, more romantic world. The curtains, furniture, and even the bold fireplace all support the walls rather than compete with them. That same connection carries through to the actual windows. Natural light and garden views blend with the pale green walls, floral curtains, painted blossoms, and soft colors, making the room feel almost like an extension of the landscape while still maintaining its elegance. And the symmetry again is so prevalent in here. The mirrors, paintings, windows, and fireplace all create a strong sense of order and balance, making the room feel warm, personal, and very inviting. And the mirror on this wall had a very deliberate design purpose as well, to reflect the natural outdoor landscape and bounce ambient daylight deeper into the room. By mirroring exterior views at the eye or desk level, Wharton successfully brought nature inside, creating an expansive, calming environment. I think that is just so genius, and it really does make an impact. And the fireplace marble right here is the same marble that we saw in the dining room fireplace downstairs, which quietly ties Edith's private suite to the rest of the home. Edith's sitting room feels like a glimpse into the world she was trying to create for herself, a private world of beauty and order, where every detail seems to reflect the quiet strength of the woman who lived here. This is my favorite room in Edith Wharton's house. I would move here in a second. In between Edith's private sitting room and her bedroom is her private bathroom. The French influence in here comes through in such a delicate way. The soft botanical wallpaper, the light colors, the marble, and the clean lines all give a sense of refinement without feeling overdone. Again, we see her preference for beauty through restraint implemented here. This isn't a dark, heavy, overly decorated Victorian bathroom. It feels lighter, calmer, and more graceful. It's practical, yet beautiful. The white tub, marble sink, simple curtains, botanical walls, and the natural light all work together to make the room feel fresh, clean, and peaceful. That's what I keep noticing here at the Mount. Edith Wharton did not save beauty only for the grand public spaces. She believed every part of a home mattered, even the private, everyday spaces, just like this one. And this right here might be one of the most important rooms inside the Mount, because it was right here, in this very bedroom, where Edith Wharton said some of her best work was done, specifically while writing in bed. And honestly, I love that so much because I've always been the exact same way since grade school. I write most of these scripts for these videos right from bed, so I actually relate to that philosophy. She would wake up at 6 a.m., have breakfast right here in her room, and begin writing by morning. Often still in her pajamas, with her little dogs nearby. She wrote longhand for hours at a time, letting the finished pages fall all around her, where they would later be gathered and typed up by her secretary. So the papers displayed here on the bed are such a beautiful little tribute to the way she actually worked. And Edith was incredibly disciplined. She wrote almost every day, and over the course of her life, she produced more than 40 books, novels, short stories, ghost stories, travel writing, garden and design writing, and many essays. 40 books in 40 years. That kind of output did not happen by accident. It came from focus, routine, imagination, and an incredible devotion to her work. The room itself feels soft and personal, with pale blue walls, white French country furniture, natural lighting, family portraits, and those beautiful garden views that probably made her feel so calm as she wrote each piece. Above the bed are portraits of her father and brothers, Harry and Freddie. And in the corner, there's a photograph of her mother, displayed exactly where it was when Edith lived here. And that detail is very interesting because Edith's relationship with her mother was complicated. They didn't always understand one another, and Edith often felt emotionally constrained by the expectations of the world and the ones her mother set on her. So in this room, we see both sides of her life, the family she came from, and the creative world that she built for herself. The society expectations around her and the independence that she was able to carve out through her writing. This was her private sanctuary where she built worlds, exposed society, imagined different characters, and wrote stories that would outlive the very world that she came from. And standing here, it's easy to understand why the Mount mattered so much to her. It gave her privacy, beauty, order, and a space where she was able to fully come into her own as one of the most important writers of the 20th century. Some of the former guest rooms and the private spaces here at the Mount are now used as exhibit rooms, which helps tell the larger story of Edith Wharton's life, legacy, and the many chapters this house went through after she left. One exhibit focuses on Edith's later years in France, including her final home, Pavilion Colombe, and the way she remained surrounded by beauty until the end of her life. The quote on the wall says, "It is good to grow old, as well as to die, in beauty." And that feels so perfectly Edith Wharton. Even near the end of her death, beauty was not just decoration to her, it was a way of living, a way of thinking, and almost a form of dignity. Another exhibit looks at personal style, women's magazines, and the world of ladies' wear. Wharton understood presentation. She understood how women of her class were expected to look, dress, behave, entertain, and perform in public. And as magazines became more popular in the early 20th century, they helped shape ideas about womanhood, fashion, domestic life, and taste for a much wider audience. Edith was a very smart businesswoman, so even after she became a major literary figure, editors continued to ask her for stories that were more romantic, more dramatic, and more suited to mass-market magazine readers. So this exhibit gives us another side of her world, the tension between art and commerce, personal style, and public image. Another room tells the story of the Mount after the Whartons lived here. During her final summer here in 1911, her life was changing dramatically. Her marriage to Teddy Wharton was falling apart and the house was eventually sold. After Edith left, she never returned to live here ever again. The Mount later passed through two different families who lived here, became part of the Fox Hollow School for Girls, and eventually became home to Shakespeare and Company, and inspired so many other creative people in different ways. Nearby, the sewing room and service exhibits give us a very different side of life at the Mount. It really depended on staff to make the dream real. The Mount employed around 8 to 10 household servants, with a strict hierarchy that included the butler, housekeeper, cook, lady's maid, housemaids, footman, chambermaid, laundress, and kitchen maids. One of the most important staff members was Catherine Gross, Edith Wharton's longtime housekeeper. In the photograph displayed here, Catherine is shown holding 2 of Edith's beloved Pekingese dogs, which shows how close she was to the intimate daily life of the household. The staff exhibit also makes an important point about what it meant to work for a woman like Edith Wharton. She could be generous, but she was also very demanding. She relied on the emotional support and the hard work of her staff. Their hard work enabled her to have the extra time to be able to be creative and comfortable. Because Edith's ability to write, travel, entertain, garden, and design, it was all supported by the people whose labor often stayed invisible. And in 1900, domestic service was one of the most common forms of paid work for women in America. For many young women, service offered wages, lodging, meals, and some protection, but it also meant very long work days, strict rules, and very little chance of building an independent life. The exhibit reminds us that running a house like the Mount required constant labor. Cleaning, cooking, serving, sewing, washing, managing linens, tending fires, caring for clothing, and making sure the household and the grounds looked effortless to everyone else who visited. And here's the linen closet, which may seem simple, but in a house like this, linens were a major part of daily household management. Sheets, towels, table linens, napkins, guest linens, servants' linens, everything had to be washed, dried, pressed, folded, stored, counted, repaired, and ready to go right at a moment's notice. Downstairs, we arrive in the kitchen, and this gives us a very different view of life here at the Mount. After all of the elegant rooms upstairs, this is where the daily work of the house really came to life. The cooking, cleaning, washing, preparing, serving, and constant movement of the household all depended on spaces like these. And once again, one of the first things I notice is the natural lighting coming right through. Even in the kitchen, the room feels bright and open, which connects so beautifully to Edith Wharton's larger design philosophy. The original subway tile here is an important detail as well. Today, subway tile can feel classic and decorative, but at the turn of the 20th century, it also was associated with cleanliness, hygiene, and modern practicality, which deeply mattered. This was a period when germs, sanitation, and efficiency were changing the way people thought about kitchens. Science, technology, and industry were transforming domestic life, and cooks and scullery maids were right on the front lines of that change. This exhibit here talks about that kitchen revolution, how modern sinks, cleanable surfaces, better products, and new household conveniences were all changing what a kitchen could be. But even with those improvements, there was still hard work. A more modern kitchen might reduce some kinds of labor, but it didn't remove the long hours, heat, pressure, and constant demands that were placed on the staff. That is a very important part of this room. The Mount was a place of beauty and design, but it was also a very hard-working household. There's some recipe displays, jelly molds, cooking gadgets, and even Mrs. Wharton's Christmas pudding recipe, all giving us a charming little glimpse into the kinds of meals and traditions that were connected to this household. The kitchen reminds us that beauty in a house like the Mount was never created by design alone. It very much heavily relied on the labor, routines, technology, skills, and all of the people working behind the scenes each and every day. And of course, we cannot talk about the Mount without going into the gardens. For Edith Wharton, the garden and the house were never meant to feel separate. They were one with one another, and they were designed together, almost like one complete composition, with the rooms inside the house continuing outward into terraces, paths, walls, fountains, flowers, and views. Her garden ideas were deeply inspired by the Italian villas she studied and later wrote about. That influence comes through so clearly here. On one side is a sunken Italian garden, which Wharton designed as a cool, shaded, architectural space with lush greenery, stone walls, and a rustic fountain. On the other side is the French flower garden, a more colorful and formal space with wide flower beds and a fountain at the center, no doubt inspired by places like Palace of Versailles. A lime walk connects the two, making the gardens feel like a series of outdoor rooms, each with its own mood, but all connected to the larger design of the estate. The gardens are part of the house's design philosophy. They show Edith Wharton's belief that a truly beautiful home should live in conversation with the landscape around it. What I love most about Edith Wharton is how relatable she feels after touring the Mount. Yes, she was incredibly brilliant, a literary force, a trendsetter in the latest designs, a traveler, and a woman whose ideas help shape the way we still think about beautiful interiors today. But she was still a person, a lady who loved dogs, who loved writing from bed, and who loved surrounding herself with beauty. And that's what makes the Mount so incredibly powerful. Every room feels intentional. The symmetry, the natural lighting, the French and Italian influences, the garden views, the quiet elegance, and the way the house and the landscape seem to belong to one another. This home is such a beautiful expression of Edith Wharton's mind. And it also shows us her heart and soul, a woman who exposed the pressure and loneliness hidden behind society's most beautiful rooms, then later used her voice, resources, and courage to help others. So, as we leave the Mount, I think what stays with me the most is that Edith Wharton did something more than just design a beautiful house. She created a private, beautiful world of her own, one rooted in her own personal taste, a taste that would end up redefining the way we look at interior design to this day. And more than a century later, the Mount still feels timeless because Edith Wharton's vision still feels so incredibly alive here. I hope you were able to gain some inspiration from this beautiful house tour. I know I did. Let me know what room or details stood out to you the most in the comments below. And if you love historic house tours like this one, make sure to hit that thumbs up button and make sure to subscribe because I have so many more incredible homes coming your way. Trust me, you do not want to miss a single one. So until next time, everyone, keep enjoying the beauty of vintage home. Au revoir.